Good afternoon, bookworms and flyleafs. Psyched me out. I thought I was live, and then I thought I wasn't live, and then I was live. So welcome back this Friday, everybody, to Author Reads here on Fae Productions. I am your host, Fairy Princess Lolly, and today I'm here with author Catherine. It's Lundoff? Lundoff. Okay. Yep. And before we jump into the show full bore today, please, if you will, like, subscribe, and howl the bell if you would like to receive future notifications of our shows. And also a shout out to today's show sponsor, which is Platyfly Studios. And they sell fantasy-inspired clothing and accessories, which are all handcrafted by Kat Hawthorne from Indianapolis, Indiana. You can check out her newest collection in her Etsy store, which features an assortment of gorgeous breezy skirts, many of which have pockets. And she also carries a variety of accessories, including mermaid gloves, dragon scale dice bags for your clickety-clacks, and jewelry. Everything is designed with the discerning pixie in mind, with waistband sizing that ranges from 35 to 70 inches. Follow Platyfly Studios on Facebook and Instagram for information on their future sales and more. Please go give them your likes and follows, and thank you again for being a sponsor here on our show. And then, with that said, boy, I cruised right through that this afternoon, didn't I? With that said, welcome to Author Reads, Catherine.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me.
You are most welcome. Please, if you will, introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about who you are and where you're from. Give us some shout outs if you have any shout outs you want to do, and let's hear about you a little bit.
Okay. All right. So I'm Catherine Lundoff. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I am an author, editor, and publisher at Queen of Swords Press, which is a small science fiction, fantasy, and horror publisher specializing in fiction from out of this world. I started the press in 2017, and we just published our 12th title this week, as a matter of fact. I don't really have like a persona. I tend to do steampunk mostly, and it's summer, it's Minnesota, and we're having an entire week of rainstorms. So
wow.
I wasn't going to put on the wool hat, I'm sorry. So you get the modified version of the fairy goth mother look.
Well, you look fabulous, that is for sure. And you look like you have everything necessary to be properly fabulous for steampunk.
We try.
Yeah, look, you have gloves even and everything. Let's see those gloves. Oh, I like those. Those are, yes, they're like little tiny little crochet like gloves.
I got them at Dent's in London, so they're even like special shiny.
Overseas you have imported fancy gloves. Not imported. I mean, imported by you is what I'm trying to say.
Imported in my luggage.
Yes, that is what I'm trying to say.
Like the V&A gift shop or something.
Oh man. So tell us a little bit, if you will, Queen of Swords Press. Now this is your this is your publishing company, yes? Mm-hmm. That you own. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Tell us about that.
Sure. So I was traditionally published by another publisher for a number of years. Had a bunch of short stories out, had a novel or two out, did a couple of anthologies, and wacky hijinks ensued, and it became necessary to go do something else. Let's go with that. And so one of the things I'd been thinking about for a couple of years was starting up my own publishing company. At the time, the exact phrase I used was, "I cannot possibly be more dysfunctional than some of the people I've been dealing with." And anyway, this is mostly true. There are days and there are days. So started thinking about what that was going to need to look like, planned for it, and so forth. Wrote some more books, did some more stuff. And ultimately, in 2017 was our launch year. And I launched with my backlist. So I started with 2 of my novels and a couple of short story collections. And in 2018, I started publishing authors who weren't me. So that was a bold new direction. We did an anthology, and I published an author from Colorado, and kind of branched out from there. The last couple of titles have all been authors from New Zealand, which has been really cool.
Oh, that's cool. International publishing company.
International. We're special. We're shiny. I myself identify as bi or queer. And so a lot of the work that we've been publishing has up until this point been, very trans authors, bi authors,
Nice.
We're going to be publishing a local author local to me, as in somebody else who lives in Minneapolis, in November. And that's going to be the launch of a new line, which is going to focus on science fiction, fantasy, and horror by authors from the upper Midwest. They may or may not have queer content. So that's going to be kind of a different thing. So we're going to check that out and see how that goes. Other than that, personally, my own writings have appeared in everything from Sherlock Holmes anthologies to Vampire the Masquerade anthologies to romance, erotica.
Okay, I have to pause you.
You name it, I get around.
Uh-oh. Did I freeze? Did you freeze? Did I freeze?
Not sure.
Okay, I was saying that
Sure.
I know that a lot of our viewers and extended friends and network have a lot of Vampire the Masquerade connection / interest involvement. So tell me about that anthology.
Okay. So a few years back, I got asked to write for the Vampire the Masquerade 20th anniversary anthology. There were two of them. They're both available from Onyx Path Publishing. The second one was called The Cainite Conspiracies, and that's for the more medieval setting for vampire. So I've written for that. I've written for the Wraith 20th anniversary anthology, in case we have any Wraith fans out there. And I just found out today that the story I wrote for the Ghost Hunters anthology just went live, like 10 minutes ago.
That's cool. Where could people find that, if it's okay to ask?
Oh, sure. You can either get it at Drive Through Fiction or Onyx Path Publishing. Onyx Path, I think, sells everything through Drive Through Fiction and Drive Through RPG. So I would check there. But it'll also be available on Amazon. It's probably not there yet. They usually start out at Drive Through and then kind of trickle out from there. But I've seen the anthologies for sale on Amazon and other platforms, so I know it's possible to find them there.
Yay! Well, that's super cool. So I was going to ask, what do you think are some of the biggest differences, since you have been on both sides, or even currently are on both sides of this fence, where you are a writer and also a publisher? What do you think some of the biggest differences between those two sides of the fence are?
Oh, for starters, I think it's really easy as a writer to take rejections personally. But as an editor and publisher, I'm rejecting things all the time. And there's so many factors that go into it, a lot of which don't have to do with whether or not the piece has potential, or whether or not, in some cases it's good. I mean, I've turned things down because they were good, but I couldn't find a way to plug them into what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to accept somebody's work if I'm going to sit there and go, huh, I know we took your book, but we don't actually know how to find an audience for it. Sorry.
So
that benefits
me. I'm curious, what makes it hard to sometimes, like, what kind of content is it hard to find an audience for, or does it more have to do with fitting X content into Y theme for, like, an anthology, for example?
Well, some of it is about that. I mean, we're a small shop, so it's me and I have a part-time assistant, and this is our first year in which we have an intern from the university, the local university. And so, we're a small shop. And so it means that it has to sort of align with my personal tastes. And you get this a lot with small press publishers. It's just a lot of people don't really talk about it that way. But realistically, what it boils down to is, if I'm the one doing the marketing, I have to absolutely love and believe in your work.
Right. That
And,
makes perfect sense.
you know, your work can still be good. Your work can still appeal to another publisher. It's just that maybe it doesn't work for me, you know.
Sure. Well, because you're the one that has to be out there selling it, right? And so it's it is hard to sell something if you are not, because if you not even dislike, but if that's just not your area of interest, then you're unlikely to have you know, you're unlikely to have even a broad knowledge of, you know, intimate knowledge where you can talk about things like to that fan base, right? As another fan to fan. And so, haha, look what fan to fan, like the like B2B, business to business, right? So, now before we jump to talking about the books you're reading from today, can I ask one more question about this whole publishing thing? Because I think that it's also probably of relevant interest to our viewers about how would they go about submitting work to your press or even other similar presses if there may be like a new author that has not done such a thing before?
Most publications, my publishers, as well as anthologies, have something called submission windows, and it means that we, for example, just closed. We were open for about 3 months. We were splitting a submittable portal with another small press, and they're quarterly, so they had a 3-month gap between when they were open. So they were like, hey, go ahead and use our submittable portal, which was really great. Lamplight Magazine, if you like horror, they're awesome people. Anyway, so we just did that. So the next time we open up probably won't be till next year. It's probably going to be for an anthology window. It depends on how many book proposals I have in the pipeline. Because I got a couple of things that I'm reading for now that I'm like, ooh, so much potential. So we'll see if I still feel that way at the end of it.
And so Lamplight Magazine, because that made me think, well, how do people go about even finding where the places are when they have the open windows? And you're saying that Lamplight Magazine is kind of a portal for maybe finding that sort of stuff?
No.
Okay.
There's different like publications and websites and Facebook groups and things that will run calls for stories. So there's a bunch of if you go out and you look at writer submissions on Facebook, for example, you can find several of them. People will post when they're open. People will post when they run across things. There are also websites they're called market websites. Like Horror Writers of America runs its own, website market listings, for example. And then there's other things out there. So some of it is looking at the publishers you like, the magazines you like. Check their websites, check when they're open, check what they're looking for. The other thing is to do things like if you're out on Facebook anyway, join one or two of the groups just so you're getting what other people are submitting to and you're seeing what's out there and what's available.
Cool.
So those are two of the best ways to do it. Usually what I tell people is to sign up for our newsletter, and I'll say like a month or two, usually a couple of months in advance, hey, we're going to open in June,
Yeah.
So stay tuned. Don't send anything before then.
Not before then, otherwise it might get lost in the pile of things. So tell us a little bit, if you will, about today's books maybe, if there's time to hear from both of them, that you're going to be reading from, and give us a little context for what we're about to hear.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to be reading a little bit from Silvermoon. Let's see if I can actually get that lined up with the camera. I did. Yay. I'm so proud of myself. Okay. So I have 2 books out about a pack of menopausal werewolves. It's set in a sort of alternate vision of the American West. Think Colorado, New Mexico-ish. And it's contemporary. It's not steampunk or anything. And it's about this place called Wolf's Point. And Wolf's Point was a magical place for a lot of Native American tribes who settled some people there. Then fur traders came in, and then eventually, more Europeans came in. And
is it a real place? It's based on a real place? Okay.
People do occasionally ask me if they can go there, but no, I made it up. Anyway, so one of the things that they did was to resolve conflict was that they got together and they were looking for, a group of people who could serve as protectors of the valley, to keep the space good, to keep things livable. And so they settled on women past childbearing age, hence menopausal werewolves. And there's a whole story behind where I came up with this idea too. So I wrote, the first book is from the perspective of a newly divorced woman who's just turned 50. She's been living in the town for a couple of years. She has no idea any of this stuff is going on because not everybody becomes a werewolf. The magic has to call you. So it's place-based magic. And she gets to find out that she, in fact, is joining the pack. She's, has always identified as straight, but she's got a crush on her next door neighbor. And so it's a coming out at midlife, menopausal werewolves, found family, second chance romance, all of that nifty stuff. Blood Moon, which is the sequel that came out this year, is from it alternates between Becca's perspective and Erin, that's the neighbor / eventual girlfriend, from their perspectives. And it's, about them sorting out their relationship. It's about Erin dealing with her sobriety. And it's also, it touches on a lot of the found family aspects of the first book. So they both got some paranormal romance aspects to them. They're not technically speaking romances. They're more in the, dark fantasy, urban fantasy arena, but you can also describe them as slow burn romances. I've seen people, reviewers talk about them that way. So one of the things that happened when I was doing book one was I started out trying to write something because I wanted to feel more represented. Am I personally a menopausal werewolf? No, but I am, a woman in her 50s. And when I first wrote these, I was actually in my late 40s. And there's not a lot of rep out there. There's more than there used to be. I've got a whole list on Goodreads now that's almost 200 books long of books with, female protagonists over 45 in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. But when I originally wrote these, it was harder to find that. And so I wanted something that felt, real to me, that was about women I could relate to. And one of the things that happened when the first book came out was that I had a number of people come to me and tell me that it was their coming out book, which was just like,
that's a really wonderful. Yeah, that is. That's a really wonderful thing to hear for feedback.
But one of the things that I was finding was about half the people who said that to me identified as some form of transgender, transsexual. They were still questioning. They were non-binary, and I thought, okay, I set this up, as women entering menopause because that's how I was thinking of it at the time. Book 2 does have a trans werewolf because I really wanted, those readers to not have to write themselves into the story. Right. I wanted them to have somebody that they could look at and go, oh, that feels a little bit like me. Right. So that's one of the main differences between the two and what I learned from reader feedback from the time the first book came out till the time the second one did. So,
well, that is very cool. And I like the fact that you kind of, take the feedback and the input and then adjust, based on that. So that's a very good sign. So I guess with that said, that it's pretty much time to turn the screen over to you. For those of you watching at home, here's what is about to happen. I'm going to give the whole screen over to Catherine so she can read to us from her book, starting with Silvermoon. And yep, she's going to read. While she's reading, I will be in the comment section with you guys, taking questions to ask her after she's done reading. And then after we do our Q&A, then we will have a drawing for, I believe it is 2 ebooks today, 1 copy of each. Is that what it is?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. Then with that said, I am going to turn the screen over to you, madam. Here you go.
All righty. Hi there. Okay. So I'm going to start a little ways into Silvermoon. This is, Becca works at the hardware store downtown. You know, she's feeling a little weird. The full moon's coming up, but she's not sure what's going to happen. So I'll start there. Before she knew it, it was the end of her day, and there was Erin waiting outside, her long form leaning up against a lamppost like something out of a noir film. All she needed was a fedora and a smoke. Becca squirmed, fantasizing about ducking out the back door for a minute, but there were Pete and Shelley herding her out the front. You gals have a nice evening. Pete winked at Erin. Just like we're on a date or something. Becca bit the words back before they could cross her lips. There was no point in planting that particular seed where it didn't need to start growing. Those kinds of rumors could wreak some serious havoc on her non-existent dating prospects. She bit back a snort and made herself smile up at Erin. You didn't have to stop by to meet me, you know. I'm used to walking home alone in the evening. Erin grinned back at her. But tonight the moon's almost full, and the mountains look even more gorgeous than usual. I thought you might want to take the long way home and check out the scenic route. I even brought tea. She held out a shiny little coffee mug and a small white paper bag. And chocolate. You do think of everything. Becca helped herself to a small piece of the chocolate and gulped down the tea before handing the bag and the cup back. Erin turned away to tuck them in her pack just as the moon caught Becca's eye. She found herself staring up at it like she'd never seen it before. Had it always been so white, so compelling? It pulled at the tides in her blood, rustling under her skin until she was so jumpy she wanted to run and howl. She forced her tone to sound casual. Let's walk then. They moved briskly, Becca surprising herself by keeping up with Erin's long strides. There was a breeze blowing tonight, coming in from out of town somewhere. It was full of tantalizing scents, ones that Becca had never noticed before. The wind's fingers twisted their way through her shoulder-length gray and brown hair, lifting it out of the scrunchie that tried to restrain it until she gave up and yanked it off. She felt like anything might happen tonight. The thought thrummed through her like a drumbeat. Do you run? Erin's voice growled from somewhere above her, and she shivered as if she was shaking off an old skin. For an answer, she swung her bag back out of the way. Then she lunged forward into a lope that came easily to her. It wasn't too fast, but it was certainly more of a run than she'd attempted in years. She tried not to think about how much her calves would hurt later. Erin effortlessly kept pace with her as they charged from downtown into the more deserted side streets, heading for the river. The bag banging against Becca's back was a minor irritation, one she could ignore in her newly discovered speed and stamina. She sucked in the wind like a drink and imagined for a moment that the two of them were chasing something they had to catch. Her white tennis shoes twinkled below her against the dark pavement as they surged out onto the bridge. The river rapids thundered beneath its rusting metal trusses, and Erin caught Becca's arm to slow her down and draw her to the rail. Together, they panted out into the moonlit dark in companionable silence. Becca grinned down at the water, its rushing length matching her mood. Maybe this will be the year that I finally go on that whitewater trip Ed was always going on about. Sounds like a great idea, Erin said. And with that, Becca knew who she wanted to go with. She'd been alone too long. It was time that she started making some new friends. She glanced sidelong at Erin, watching her nostrils flare in the breeze. The slight elongation of her face that Becca had seen earlier was back, as was the silver tint in her eyes. But now it felt right, like it was the way she should look. She grinned back at Becca, and even the length and sharpness of her teeth seemed to suit her face better than they had back in town. Thanks for running with me. I needed that. Rough day crunching the numbers? Becca remembered that Erin was an accountant, but she always had problems reconciling that with what she'd seen of her neighbor. She looked as if she should be out herding cattle or something, lariat in hand. Always. Erin threw back her head, tilting her nose up at the moon. For a second, Becca wondered if she was going to howl at it. They both looked up, silent again for a moment. Then Becca glanced down at the water, and her hands on the railing. Had her fingers always been so long, the backs of her hands so dark, almost as if they were covered with black fur? Have some more tea. Erin nudged her hard, as if determined to interrupt her thoughts, and thrust the thermos into Becca's hands. When Becca looked at her fingers again a couple of seconds later, they looked normal. So when you were going through menopause, did you think you were seeing a lot of crazy things? Stuff you knew couldn't be happening? She asked at last. She tried to make her tone sound casual, as if she was just making conversation. Are you kidding? Erin laughed heartily. I thought I was seeing Elvis down at the diner every time I had a hot flash. But she appeared to catch a bit of Becca's mood then and reached out to pat her shoulder reassuringly. You'll be fine. It just takes a little adjustment. Seeing Elvis wouldn't be so bad, Becca thought. It was the rest of it that was kind of disturbing. That was when she noticed the van traveling slowly down the highway that ran past the end of the bridge. Not that there was much to notice about it. It was white with a logo on the side that she couldn't read from where they stood, and that was about it. But there was something about the tinted windows and the way it paused as it passed the bridge, almost like the driver was watching them, sizing them up, that made it sinister. It made the back of her neck tingle and her knees quiver a little, like she wanted to chase it or run away or something. She could feel Erin stiffen at her side, and when she looked up, she could see the other woman's lips curled back in a snarl. Her incisors looked impossibly long in the moonlight. Bastards are back, Erin spat, glaring ferociously at the van as it disappeared around a curve. Huh? What bastards? You know who's driving that thing? Becca was alert now, sensing some kind of danger, though she didn't know what it could be. Erin took a deep breath, and it looked as if she was forcing herself to relax a little. Just some guys out to cause trouble. They've been around here before, and some of us had to let them know they weren't welcome. Looks like we'll be doing that again. Erin sent another glare in the direction the van had gone. Well, come on, I think we better get you home. Becca's lips parted as a horde of questions tried to force their way out. Why did Erin know all these things about Wolf's Point that she didn't? Secret rituals, vigilante justice. What was next? Monsters in the woods? But she glanced at her companion and closed her mouth, swallowing the questions back down. Erin's mind was elsewhere, and whatever she was thinking about was serious. Her own curiosity could wait a day or two. She just hoped it wouldn't be longer than that. Pause for a second here. I know the cup isn't period, sorry. All right, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to the first time that Becca transforms. And one of the other nifty things about Wolf's Point is that it has its very own local women's club, which includes both pack members and perfectly ordinary women who gather there for meetings and book clubs and parties and whatnot. And it was one of the things that they set up with the original settlers. So in the meantime, Becca's run into this woman at the creek who's behaving really oddly and is asking a bunch of questions about wolves in the area. And Becca goes, talks to the sheriff. The sheriff's not interested, refers everything to his deputy. Lizzie Blackhawk is Shelley's, Becca's boss's cousin. So that'll figure into the plot later. So Erin is coming by to pick up Becca to take her over to the women's club. And this is the night of the full moon. Becca shook her head and grabbed a matching dark blue top and slacks instead of her usual jeans. Nothing too fancy, but loose enough that she would be reasonably comfortable in it. Hot flashes, nerves, and all. When she put the outfit on, she realized it brought out the color of her eyes and made her look a little taller. She put her hair up in a clip and studied herself in the mirror, wondering if makeup would help. Her skin was breaking out again. Damn. It's like being a teenager all over, and that had not been that much fun the first time. The doorbell interrupted her, and she dashed out to let Erin in. You ready? Erin grinned down at her, a disturbing light in her silver-tinted eyes. My, you look good enough to eat. Becca shivered all over and fumbled for a response. Thanks. Guess we better get going, was all that came to mind. She grabbed her purse and pushed past Erin in a rush to avoid making eye contact. Erin led the way to her car without further comment. The whole drive out to the Wolf's Point Women's Club felt odd and awkward, at least to Becca. Erin chatted away about town gossip and projects she was doing around her house like nothing was wrong, as if her passengers always ignored her on mysterious trips out to the club. Becca stared out the window and mumbled responses. Part of her wondered why she was so wound up about margaritas and menopause, as she had mentally dubbed tonight's event. It was as if she could feel something huge and important hanging over them. Whatever it was felt like it was inside her too, coursing through her body with every thump of her heart until her skin felt like it was all that stood between her and some huge transformation. Stage fright had never felt like this before. She rolled down the passenger window to get some air on her overheated face. It didn't help. Becca almost bolted from the car when they got to the club. The woods on either side of the little red building beckoned. The inviting darkness under the trees called, and the moon. When did she become such a nature freak? Sure, walks in the woods were fine in their place, but in the dark? Well, although, come to think of it, it wasn't that dark, even though the sun was down. She could see almost every twig under the trees. Her fingers tightened on the car door as she struggled to keep herself from running into the woods. Later. Erin's voice came from way too close, and Becca shuddered at the promise in it, even as she turned and reluctantly followed her neighbor into the building. She tried to analyze that feeling of dread as she walked into the club. Mostly, she just thought that she wasn't ready to deal with the change with a bunch of women she clearly didn't know that well. That must be it. Night had come on, and she wanted its darkness to hide all these stupid thoughts and emotions. It was just too weird to share. But somehow the words to ask Erin if any of this had been like this for her wouldn't come to her, and she was left mute and quivering. Once inside, it got worse. It was as if she'd never seen the place before, though that was ridiculous, since she'd been coming here for ages. It was just that she'd never noticed the way it smelled like pine, or the little creaks and groans that the wooden walls made around them. Tonight, there was something new and sinister about the shadows, the lit candles on the tables, the expressions on the faces of her own neighbors that made it new and even a little terrifying. Why weren't the lights on? The candles gave the place a spooky look. Even Shelley seemed mysterious and scary tonight. She smiled at Becca, but her teeth looked too long all of a sudden, making her face predatory instead of welcoming. As Erin had promised, there was cake and a couple of pitchers of margaritas on the table, along with some cans of soda. But Becca no longer felt like this was anything more than a simple celebration. The atmosphere was charged, and while she was thinking about it, where was everyone else? The women's club had more members than this. She could hear movement in the next room, but only Erin, Molly, and Shelley were in the front. Erin poured her a margarita, and she gulped down half of it before she realized what she was doing. Shelley sat on one of the padded benches and pulled her down to sit next to her. Look, Becca, we weren't sure about what was going to happen tonight until a little while ago. Sometimes these kinds of changes come on really suddenly, and we don't have a lot of time to prepare. It brings on new feelings and transformations, physical and emotional. I know you're going through a tough time, and I'm sorry we haven't talked about it. Between my mom's illness and those guys coming back here, I haven't been paying as much attention to preparing you the way I should have. Becca wondered if she looked as puzzled as she felt. Who was Shelley talking about? Those warriors from the website? If they included that couple from down by the river, that would make sense, given the logo and her general bad feeling about them. What didn't make sense was why Shelley would care about them. Did they pose some kind of threat? If so, to whom? Before she could ask, the front door opened, and the women began trickling in by twos and threes. Shelley sighed and patted her shoulder. Don't worry about a thing. We all went through it our first time, too. It'll be hard to get used to, but we'll help you. She stood and walked away to greet the others, leaving Becca staring after her in complete bewilderment. It looked like Shelley standing up with some kind of signal. Molly came over and ushered Becca into the other room and into a large cushioned chair surrounded by a circle of other chairs. All the other women followed them in. Becca sat down nervously, the silence in the room making her twitchier by the minute. So am I being initiated or something? Her voice trailed off. Erin gave her a reassuring smile that made her think of a wolf's grin, and it was all Becca could do not to run for the door. She made herself look around as the others, all 20 or so of them, sat down. She recognized women she had seen around town, even though not all of them lived in Wolf's Point proper. There was Mrs. Hui, whose family ran Wolf's Point's only Chinese restaurant, and Carly Simpson, the Baptist pastor's wife. Her neighbor from a few doors down, Gladys Sherman, nodded from her seat. Adelia Rodriguez from the gas station on Central gave her a shy smile. She didn't know the others by name, but all were women of a certain age, as those stupid magazines put it. None under 45 or so, but all hale and hearty. There was something else they had in common, too, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. Erin set up a large mirror across from her so she could watch her own frowning, searching face and stiff body. This senseless gesture annoyed her, and she found herself snarling a little in response. And there, just for a minute, was the face that had terrified her the other day in her bathroom mirror. She flinched away, shivering. She didn't look like that all the time now, did she? Despite her fear, she could feel that same wildness building in her. Something was clawing its way to the surface inside her, racing beneath her skin and preparing to break through. She wanted to run and hunt and feel the wind outside. It made her impatient, and her feet and hands tapped the floor and the chair in time to her pulse. As if Becca's mood was contagious, Shelley glanced out the window, then cleared her throat and stood. She had a long red taper in her hand, the flame dancing on an air current as it crossed the room. Distracted from her troubled thoughts, Becca imagined that her boss looked like an old-time shaman in a painting, standing there with her long black hair flowing over her shoulders and her dark eyes looking out on forever. She had never seemed so beautiful or so much a complete stranger. Shelley cleared her throat and said, "I think we're ready to begin. The moon is starting to rise and we'll need to be ready. Thank you all for coming to welcome our member, Becca Thornton, as she enters the change that has taken each of us in our time. Let us help Becca embrace her own transformation and join with us to make the pact stronger." She waved the candle in a strange pattern and sprinkled something on the floor. She walked forward and circled Becca's chair. The hell was this? What was the pact? Becca's thoughts were frantic now, her skin burning. She could feel the sweat trickling down her back and sides under her shirt, her heart racing so fast that she trembled with each beat. Her whole body felt odd, out of place, as if it belonged to someone else. Everything was too long, too short, too stretched, too furry. That was the thing that put her over the edge. She closed her eyes against the sudden wrenching pain that shot through her, starting at her feet and working its way up. It was like being pulled in 15 directions, unable to respond to any of them. Her hair was standing on end and she felt her hands tighten on the chair. From somewhere close by, there was a sound of tearing and rending, of wood snapping. Something very scary was going on. The thought drove her to her feet, eyes open now and body tense to flee. Her movement showed in the mirror and she glanced at it, then froze. Her face was long, her eyes golden brown. Her hair was working its way down her forehead in a V. She was crouched over, huge and menacing. Her hands were far longer than they should have been, with fingers whose nails looked like claws. They were also covered with a light black fuzz. The arms of the chair she'd been sitting in were matchsticks now, the stuffing trickling down to mound on the floor. Becca Thornton opened her mouth to scream, but what came out was more like a cross between a howl and a yelp. She lunged forward, trying to get away from the monster in the mirror, and found herself bouncing back from the surrounding air as if she'd hit a wall. She spun around the chair, searching for a way out, clawing at nothing, with hands that were no longer hers. And I'll stop there with that part. So what do you think? Is there time for a Blood Moon reading too?
I think that we could do a little bit from that one, depending on how much we have 15 minutes till 3 o'clock. So that would, if that gives you a frame of reference.
Yep, this will be pretty short. Okay, so a bunch of other stuff happens in Blood Moon. A pack of wannabe werewolf hunters comes to town, and they, among other things, they are traveling with a former member of the pack, and they have what they think is a cure for lycanthropy that they're determined to force the werewolves to take. A bunch of things happen, but you'll have to read the book to find out the rest of them. So Blood Moon starts like 2 months after everything in Silvermoon wraps up. And by this point, Erin's lost her house, and because her ex-husband owned half of it, and he basically went through and sold it while she was off running around with the pack and didn't know that he was doing that. So the house, she's moved across the street rather with Erin. And so they're living together. Their relationship is still kind of up in the air. They're not quite sure what they want to be to each other. They're, running around with the pack, stuff's happening. So that starts, after all that has begun to occur. So this is a little bit of chapter 1 of Blood Moon. Erin Adams looked out at the mountains and tried not to think about what was in the trunk of her car. At least the mountains around Wolf's Point were still as beautiful as ever. She wondered if she'd get the chance to run through them again, feel the wind in her fur, the ground flying by under her paws, the pack at her side. That thought was enough to make her look back at her car. Erin rubbed her aching forehead and closed her eyes. This was, without question, the worst thing she'd ever done, even if she couldn't remember doing it. But maybe there was still time to call Shelley and get her help to figure a way out of this mess that she'd blundered into. That was what pack alphas did, or so Shelley kept reminding her. But that might make Shelley an accessory if they got caught, or rather when she got caught. Erin closed her eyes for an instant. Lying was never a thing she'd been good at or wanted to get good at. Anyone she called would almost certainly go down with her. That thought weighed her down like a rock. The pack couldn't afford to be without its alpha so soon after they got her back, not to mention what it would do to Pete and the kids. There was no way she could drag Shelley into this. Her thoughts turned to Becca, waded through a jumbled mess of emotions, and came back with a single realization. They'd suspect her first. Becca was her friend, her housemate, her something they still hadn't defined, but which felt more like girlfriend every day. Her stomach did a slow, leisurely flip when she thought about that, and she almost smiled. But this wasn't the time to think about Becca. She couldn't afford to be distracted, to be vulnerable. Not now. Maybe there was another solution, a way to hide what had happened. But then what? She'd still know. And she'd have to carry the burden of what she'd done alone. She knew where that road led. Falling off the wagon to cope with her guilt wasn't an option either. Besides, if she ditched the body out here and it was found, the regular wolves would certainly get blamed for it. The new governor was already pushing for a wolf hunting season, and that would put things right over the edge. She didn't want that on her conscience either. The wild wolves were kin as much as they were cover for the pack. Erin ran her fingers through her short-cropped brown hair, wondering if there was anyone else she could turn to. But she couldn't think of any other pack member who'd be able to do anything about the situation, not more than she could do herself. It certainly wasn't the kind of thing that her AA sponsor had signed up for, or any of her friends for that matter. So she was on her own. There was nothing for it but to lie in the bed she'd made for herself. She pulled her cell phone out of her pocket and selected a contact. Hi, it's Erin. I've done something I need. Can you come up to Spruce Point? Yes, it's important. I want you to see it before Sheriff Henderson does. She clicked the phone off and glanced toward the road. There was nothing to do now but wait. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
All right. Right on a cliffhanger. I guess that's a perfect, perfect for the Friday cliffhanger. So okay. So I have a couple questions here, and then some also from the audience. I hope it's okay if I ask. I just have little curiosities, like what is it that she sprinkled on the floor when she was doing the whole candle?
It's a combination of sand and salt.
Sand and salt. I was like, undefined. Want to know? Because, well, you know, because sometimes there's actually the thing that's behind. So, we have. Let me cut over here. You have several characters in this found family. Have you taken inspiration for those characters from your own found family?
Not really. I mean, there's aspects of them, you know, I think that certainly reflect people I know. You know, I'm not Becca, but there's some of me in her. There's some of me in Erin. You know, so I think that it's certainly going to, you know, tinge what I've written simply because I know people like that, but I didn't, you know, wholesale take anybody from my life and put them in my book.
Right. Just so you can execute them later.
No. That makes people antsy. Bad things happen. We don't do that.
I got the wrong thing away there. I was looking for. So, what made you decide to write about werewolves?
Okay, there's a story in there. Okay, so a long time ago, like back in I don't know, 2011, an editor approached me about writing a novella for an anthology of female werewolf stories. And I had just watched Ginger Snaps, which is a terrific horror film. Yeah. Anyway, Ginger Snaps.
I have seen it.
And there were a couple of things that came out right around that time about women turning into werewolves at first menses. So there was that. There's an author named Susie McKee Charnas who has a story called Boobs, which is about a high school student, who's being sexually harassed, gets bitten, wreaks havoc. It's good stuff. But there's like this whole little subset of these. And, I looked at it and I needed, an idea for this anthology. I'm like, I don't want to do teenagers. So I was poking around and I stumbled across one of the miscellaneous, diagnose your illnesses on the websites. And this particular one was full of symptoms of menopause. And it went through and was like, unexplained hair growth. Your teeth get longer because your gums are receding. It kind of went on like this for a while, and I'm like, you know what that sounds like? And menopausal werewolves were born.
I'm just like I'm over here trying to imagine like menopause or lycanthropy, right? It's like people side by side. Which one is it, you guys?
Could go either way.
Right? Suddenly you like have a mustache with handlebars. Like, I don't know, it's just like the way they make it sound is so like very exaggerated. But that's also that you saying that. I'm leaning on my phone here. Okay. I was like, what's under my elbow? Okay. You saying that though made me think about how it isn't it lycanthropy, like an actual medical condition that people can have that causes them to grow full bodies of hair. And that's where we get people, like the circus freak kind of people that did that. But there really actually is a medical condition that causes you to grow hair all over your body.
Yeah.
And so
there's also a medical condition that causes you to seem dead and people bury you and then you rise from the dead. But
really?
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately.
Wow. What's that?
I forget what it's called, and I would have to look it up, but it's believed to be one of the origins for vampire myths. Was that
interesting?
Yeah, people had it.
So, does this medical, the existence of it, does that play into it all? What you were just reading to us from, where the werewolf hunters roll into town and decide they want to cure the werewolves?
They're it's more of like a religious, spiritual thing for them. They're organized by somebody who was a pack member and left town feeling like she'd been wronged by the pack and is coming back for a combination of revenge and, you don't have to be like this. I found the one true way. So it's more of a crusade of sorts for her.
Yikes. That fanaticism is always scary. Oh, this is interesting. Newt says, lead poisoning causes the appearance of death. I didn't know that.
There's a couple of things. I mean, there's something that's like, it's like a form of seizures and you go rigid and you look dead, apparently. So.
Interesting. We have a cat joining us. I guess he must have heard that. Right. Cats and books go together. Cats and books and cats and books. Let's see. Do you expect any further books in this world?
Well, book 2 was out exactly 3 days before somebody asked me when I was planning on starting the next book. So it was originally visualized as a 3-book arc. Mm-hmm. And I had the Silvermoon came out in an earlier edition with my previous publisher, and then we broke up, and then a bunch of stuff happened in my life, so there was lag time. So I re-released Silvermoon. So the new edition is longer than the first one, has a different cover. I made some character changes, that kind of stuff. So I haven't yet started working on book 3. Book 3 will be Blue Moon. But I'm starting to kick it around in the back of my brain. So yes, I anticipate there being at least one more book. There might be more than that. These characters haven't let go of me yet. So,
and kind of to dovetail with that a little bit, do you plan on writing different types of creatures when you're done with this trilogy?
Blood Moon introduces some other paranormal critters. And again, a lot of things came from like discussions about the first book. You know, because I mean, the thing of it is that, you know, as an author, you're writing your book, and usually you're spending a lot of time in your own head. You know, you may be talking to your writers group or whatever about it, but really you're in your own head.
Right.
And so having gotten through the first book and then going out into the world and then spending a lot of time talking to people about the first book, you know, people were like, ooh, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And they got very attached to the characters. I had a number of people ask if they could go and visit Wolf's Point, which was nice because, you know, I'd made something that felt realistic, which was cool.
Yeah. Well, that was like the first question that I asked. I was like, oh, is it a real place?
No, I made it up. But one of the things that came out of it was, well, if you've got one set of supernatural critters, why not more? And I'm like, that's a valid point. I hadn't really thought about it, but sure. You know, so by the time we get into book 2, there are other paranormal creatures, you know, running around the valley and things going on. So,
and so
addressing it as I go along.
Okay, and so before I ask a last question here, this is the part, you guys, where you all put your names into the comment section if you're watching out there, so that you can be entered to win. Do we want to do one drawing for 2 books, or two drawings for 1 book each?
I think it might make more sense to give the same person both books, but
Okay.
you know, if you have a way that you normally do this, you can certainly handle it that way. So.
No, I don't. We can, either one works just fine. So we will do 2 books, 1 winner, and now is the time, though. Put your name into the comments, you guys, and I will add you on to the Wheel of Win. So the last question that I had wanted to ask was about some of the other books that you have, either from you or also with your with Queen of Swords Press.
Well, we just published, literally just published this week, Foxhunt, which is a novel by a New Zealand author named Reb Wigmore. And Foxhunt is this really terrific queer science fiction novel. It's set in Earth's far future. The protagonist is a bi-trans woman. They're dealing with the aftermath of an ecological apocalypse, but it's into the rebuilding phase. So it's not, you know, the doom and gloom we are suffering part of it. It's the, we've gotten through that. Now we're into the, how do we build back better? And so it's about this character, and you know, she runs afoul of a group of they're essentially assassins and bounty hunters that keep the peace. They enforce the energy rules so that nobody can once again, you know, overexploit natural resources. So it's a really interesting spin on it. She does some really great things with it. And you know, the Rem does some great things with it. Rather, she is Orpheus, not the author. And so Orpheus, the character, is, you know, building allies and building networks and figuring out how to navigate this world that she finds herself in. And it's beautifully done, and I just love it to pieces. One of the things some of the other folks here might be interested in is I have a collection of short stories called Out of This World. And Out of This World, among other things, includes my Tam Lin retelling, which is a Scent of Roses. It's kind of like a tasting menu for my work. It's like there's some horror, there's some science fiction, there's some fantasy, lots of stuff. Something else that might be of interest, this anthology, Scourge of the Seas of Time and Space, is a collection of fantastical pirate stories. And I ended up with submissions from authors from like 12 different countries, different time periods. There are pirates in outer space, all kinds of pirates. Good stuff. And we did this really terrific set of steampunk books, Murder on the Titania, and I'm never very good with where the cameras go and waving things around. These are linked steampunk stories set in an alternate Colorado. And the protagonist is a bi-Latina land pirate who has her own railway car and her own crew. And there are zombies, and there are tea parties, and there's just all kinds of stuff. They're really fun. So I recommend those.
Can I ask why Colorado? Why that
because
area?
that's where the author's from.
Oh, okay, because that's also where your book is set as well, the werewolf books.
Yeah, it's
Colorado, New
kind of in
Mexico?
that sort of Colorado, New Mexico border,
Yeah.
because I've spent some time there, basically. The fact that Alex's book is also set in Colorado was kind of a fluke.
Okay.
I mean, in terms of it wasn't like I was walking around going, if only we had more books set in Colorado. But what had happened was I'd gotten the press started. I was the point of starting to think about publishing other authors. Alex and I had been hanging out at Worldcon, and Alex had this series of steampunk stories published by a publisher that went under literally like 2 weeks after releasing the full collection of the stories. So I think I was like one of 5 people who read it who wasn't a family member. And so we were sitting around at Worldcon. I was like, hey, I get this publishing thing off the ground. You should send me those. So about a year into it, Alex reached out and said, remember these? I was like, yeah. So, did a bunch of editing on it. They don't look like the first version. They have different covers, different arrangements of the stories. There's some new work in here that wasn't in the original stories. But yeah, I mean, they are rollicking adventures set in, this alternate Colorado that has, there's zombies. They're called the Infected. And what they've done is it means that the Native American tribes still control the plains, but the Europeans are all like in the cities and in a much more confined space. And so it's about, the conflict between the two and the Infected, and the cities are all capitals of duchies. So they've imposed their own sort of European fiefdom model on them. And they're just they're great stories, and I'm trying to persuade Alex to write more of them, and they have told me they are working on them. So.
All right. Well, with that said, I've got our names, I think, from the audience, and then also we have our names from our Patreon patrons and our YouTube subscribers. There are 3 ways that you guys can get entries. So everybody is now onto the Wheel of Win, unless you put your name right now into the comments and get in just under the wire here. I am going to share it. So here is our list of names, and we will put those onto the Wheel of Win now. And with that said, we're going to do 1 spin for a copy of Silvermoon and Blood Moon ebooks. And today's winner is Uh-oh. Did I spell that wrong? Akira Phelan? Or is it supposed to be Erica? I might have typoed that name, which I apologize if I did. But you are today's winner. Congratulations. The books shall be yours after the show. And I will, of course, follow up with you to get that. So, which brings us to 3:06. Look at that. We are like practically an hour on the dot. And with that said, is there anything that you would like to say to our audience before we let you go today?
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. It was a chance to dress up. I haven't had that for a while.
Yeah.
Made me kind of think about how to assemble an outfit.
Well, you looked fabulous, so you definitely got that down. And then I also want to remind everybody that you can find links to Catherine's books and Queen of Swords Press in the low bar, wherever you are watching from. If you do purchase a book, especially if you get it maybe off of Amazon or some other site like that, please remember to leave a review for her, because that is, or for any of the authors for that matter, I guess, that because it's always very helpful in the indie industry. So yes, and thank you for sharing your work with us. So
thank you.
With that said, I guess we shall bid you adieu, and happy Friday and weekend to you, madam.
You too.
All right. Thank you so much for coming and being on our show today. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hello, friends. This is Gunther Hammerhands. Thank you for checking out Fairy Princess Lolly's channel. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe button. Use your troll hammer to ring that little bell icon to get notifications when she posts future videos. And if you'd like to support these magical creations, fly over to our Patreon and join the fairy family. Safe travels!